Hi, thank you for taking some time out of your day to check on my channel and click on this video. I've been on a bit of a hiatus. I've had some significant life events happen, mainly moving to Alaska from Arizona and relocating my small business, if you will, and getting settled to life in Alaska. But more importantly, we decided to build a workshop. And that's pretty much the focus of this video and what I'd like to share with you. But I apologize for the really 12-month hiatus of me being away from YouTube. I definitely intend to get back into posting some videos of, some fun things that we like to do in Alaska. We have a new toy shop for me to work on powersports toys. We actually ended up purchasing an airplane last summer, so there will be some footage on that. And enjoy the photo montage coming up. And if you have the time, I share some tips, tricks, and lessons learned of what it's like to build a building in Alaska toward the end. So enjoy. I hope you enjoyed seeing those photos. One thing that I've learned as I've gotten older is that my wife is right about 90% of the time, and I'm correct about 10% of the time, where I used to think it was 50-50. But one thing that she told me was to take a lot of pictures, and in the heat of the moment, you never really prioritize that way. Usually you're just trying to get as much done as possible in a given amount of time, and that's not the priority. But anyway, I've got a few slides that I just want to hit some bullets about what I learned and I don't know, maybe what I would do differently if I did this again, but it's not to say that I'm not happy. We're very happy with what we built. It's definitely going to serve its purpose. We're not living out there by any means. But anyway, just a quick slideshow, and we'll call it a day here. So the idea behind why we did this, right out of college, I graduated from college in 2010, and I started working for a big company in management, and my wife started her Air Force career shortly thereafter. And one thing that we kind of realized as time went on is our lives would probably be better if one of us transitioned to having less responsibility in our professional lives. So in 2019, I started experimenting with the idea of spending more time at home and starting my own business instead of having both of us work between 12 and 16 hours a day and hardly ever seeing each other. So one thing I've always enjoyed is working on powersports toys. And I wanted to create my own workspace for this. I started a small business out of the garage in our home in Arizona, and it did a lot better than I thought it would. I ended up leaving my professional job to just stay at home and work on powersports toys, and I took a pay cut, but it wasn't nearly as significant as I thought it was going to be. So, it's one of those things, if you can perform your passion and live comfortably, why not? But one of the reasons why it was specific to Alaska is, there's 4 feet of snow outside right now in January, and it's negative 30 degrees, and it's just not feasible to keep your vehicles outside so you can have your toys inside your garage. And I wanted to create a workspace to go with it. So, how does that translate to, like, why did we decide to build it? And most people are going to say, well, you're going to save money if you do things yourself, which is accurate. I believe in that 100%. But there's also some job satisfaction associated with, you investing your own time and effort to produce something. And it doesn't have to be a pole building. It can be a hobby or a craft that is much cheaper, much less of a time and effort investment, and honestly, you can probably get just as much satisfaction out of it. But that's a personal decision that you and everybody else in the world has to make. But it's something that we wanted to do. So just a couple bullets here. For those that are looking into doing something like this, just really like anything else, the research phase is by far and away the most important part of the task. You can just see how detrimental it would be if you spent, just say $1,000 to do something on your land, and then somebody comes by and says, you got to take that down, that's not your land. Or you spend $2,000 to build something and the foundation below it crumbles, and you basically have a $2,000 heap of junk sitting in your yard. And not only that, you're not just limited by your land and the conditions of the ground, but in most places, not Alaska per se, but in most places, there are people that hold you accountable to certain small print codes that govern the county or the area that you live in. And obviously you need to know those things. So do your due diligence, do the research, and figure things out. That information's typically more easily found than most people think. You can always pick up the phone and call City Hall, and they'll direct you in the right direction. A lot of things are found online without even making that phone call. But one thing that you don't find online for your land is the soil condition in the area that you're going to build. And you may want to consult with an engineer or somebody, at least to test your ground, take a soil sample or dig a hole and see what's going on there. Another thing about this project, or a project of this scale, you need to have a budget and you need to have a timeline. So after you have a plan, there needs to be a budget and a timeline associated with this. So, let's say your budget's $5,000. you need to plan for more than that, because inevitably you're going to go over budget. So either more money needs to be set aside, or you know, things need to be acquired cheaper, or you need to downgrade your features of your project. But you know, I would say it's not impossible to stay to a budget, but both in the professional and the personal world, in my limited experience, typically budgets are you need a plan under budget to come in on top of the budget, if that makes sense. And then your timeline. So this can range from a number of things. Specifically in Alaska, you're governed by a natural timeline, which is the weather. So you know, in most places in the U.S., your timeline is relatively unlimited. It's more about what you want and what your plan is. In Alaska, when there's, again, 4 feet of snow outside, I didn't want the building not finished by the time it started snowing, at least the outside of the building, because you know, you're talking about putting up a lot of money and doing a lot of work for it to get soiled in snow for a 6-month period, and that's just not something that I wanted to do. And I think a lot of people up here are pretty good about at least getting the exterior work done of their shelter before you know, the October-November area hits. And then just for perspective, you know, I couldn't break ground because the ground was frozen until May of 2021. So, you know, obviously that's not the case in most places, but it's something that definitely needs to be considered. And then a word about safety. You know, it's all about the planning ahead. Know what you're doing. Know what the right tool is. You know, for example, if you're up on a roof, are you strapped into a harness? You know, if you're greater than 12 feet above the ground, you probably should be, because nothing is worth your health and safety as far as I'm concerned. And then the last bullet on this slide: verify access to all required resources before you do anything. You know, that's something that is very specific to Alaska. You know, coming from Phoenix, Arizona, where there's a million Home Depots and Lowe's, you kind of always have access to whatever it is that they stock or carry. And yeah, there are just things you can't take for granted up here in Alaska. I've driven to 5 different places in Fairbanks to find one tool before, and luckily I found it. But you know, you don't want to get halfway through a project and then realize that you need something that A, you don't have, but even worse, B, you can't acquire it without shipping it to you and waiting a week. So again, just a consideration here. All right, the next slide is about research and resources. Yeah, I kind of talked about knowing your budget. I do want to talk about this briefly, though. Have a goal and have a plan. Most people think they're kind of the same thing when they're really not. The goal should come first of, this is who I am, this is what I want, and this is why I want to produce this result. You know, that's one method of many for setting a goal, per se. You know, how you get there is not the same as setting what the end result is. So, you know, again, if you don't have a clear goal in mind, especially during a DIY of this scale, there are going to be lots of paths that you cross where you can go a different direction. You know, with materials, a good example. You know, colors are obviously a simple and good example. But if you have a clear goal in mind, you'll know which direction to go, or you'll be less prone to confusion or hesitation, if you will. Large-scale DIY, knowledge develops into confidence. So, you know, I've done quite a few things in my professional career that helped me along my way to instill some confidence in managing big projects. Within the power sports industry, you know, I've done quite a few things that have, again, developed into a lot of confidence for not having any formal education or a mentor guiding me along the way, or working in the shop with him or her, per se. But again, back to needing to know the right thing to do. One place that I looked for knowledge and developing some sort of method is R&R Buildings, which they have a huge YouTube channel with tons of followers and videos. And again, even if you don't know the first thing about anything, and you're a visual learner like me, you have to choose a place to start and start figuring something out. So investing many hours in watching, I think the guy's name is Kyle, his videos, reading building codes from other counties to know structurally what will and won't hold 40 pounds per square inch of a snow load or more. And, just the correct structural way to do things so it doesn't crumble below you is a good start. And then, with the power of YouTube University and accessing other engineered building plans, you can figure it out. But as I tell a lot of people, especially the people that my wife works with, I'm not that smart of a person. There are many, many people that are much smarter than I am. And, when people come over and see it, they always ask, how'd you do this? And the first thing I say back to them is, if you have the time and you put in the effort, you're smart enough to do it. But again, it's all in planning. Tools, equipment, and materials planning, kind of already spoke to that. You need to know what is required to perform the work safely and efficiently, and you need to make sure you have access to those items. So, I've already talked about what's specific to Alaska, as in like nothing is taken for granted or guaranteed. But as for materials planning, that makes a big effect on your budget, because especially during a global pandemic, the price of material changes rapidly, and that's, I would say, the leading contributing factor as to why we went over budget with our build, because the fluctuation in the price of materials. But it just kind of is what it is. You're not going to stop halfway through to change, or to not do it, rather. And then back to the goals part of this. Why are you building what you want to build? Are the dimensions, just because somebody built a 30 by 30 on YouTube and like that will work for you, is that what you want? And the way I looked at it is, we had a small plot of land beside our house. That kind of limited the dimension, or I should say it changed the dimension from what I originally wanted, but I still built the building that I wanted for the purpose that I wanted to use it. And that's something that you should invest a lot of time into, instead of just copying somebody else's idea. And I think a lot of people get carried away with, well, that's what so-and-so did, and that's what I'm going to do. And then last but not least, make sure, again, if you've never done foundation work, you should have an engineer or a professional come out and look at the soil that you're planning on building on, to give you some reassurance that you're going to be okay. This is the same thing that I say about doing power sports work, engine work or suspension work. You break the job down into work segments, you do the research ahead, and you eat the elephant one bit at a time, or one bite at a time. If you think you're just going to build a building tomorrow, it's probably not going to work out too well. But if you say, I'm going to stand up 8 posts tomorrow, I mean, that's probably much more achievable. So break it down one step at a time. Make the time investment. Just a different tangent on this. One thing that I did was, I got the overall price of what it would cost to build something, to just call somebody and say, hey, I want this, build it for me. And that price was just outrageous, in my opinion. Again, maybe it's global pandemic, especially now that I've done the work myself, and, you take X and subtract Y. The difference between what we spent and what someone would have charged to build this, it is ridiculous. So, just take that with a grain of salt. But one thing that I did to take it a step further was, I took a job like the concrete, for example, on a 24 by 64. What is the cost for the concrete truck to come and pour it versus what's the cost, and for me to do the labor with friends, versus what's the cost to have somebody do all the foundation and the concrete work? And, X minus Y equals the difference, right? But again, just knowing that, and having that piece of data in your head not only helps you realize the value in your time and what you're doing and the knowledge and skill that you're building, but it also helps you speak a little more intelligently when people ask you questions of like, should I or shouldn't I? if I don't have as much time as you do. And again, it's part of the satisfaction of DIY. More planning ahead. Build a spreadsheet of materials, tools, and equipment. That's kind of self-explanatory. Know where you're going to get everything and how much it's going to cost. But another thing that I did specifically is I built an Excel spreadsheet, and there again, people much smarter than I am that use engineering software, 3D sketch tools. But I just took a simple Excel spreadsheet and made each cell or box, if you will, a square, and I basically made that a square foot. So if you're 20 by 20, that's 400 square feet. You make a 400 square foot area, and you map out what is going to go where in that area. So you have some sort of visual plan of what this space is going to be used for, and it cross-checks with whatever your goals are. Before you even stick a shovel into the ground, you have that not figured out down to the detail, but a general idea of where you're going and what you're doing. But yeah, if I could use only have access to one program, it'd probably be Excel for this entire project. Bullet number 3, know your limitations. Knowledge, mental, physical limitations. It's easy to get carried away because you're off the timeline. It's easy to think that you can do things by yourself when you either really can or probably shouldn't be, and just plan ahead for that. So, like, again, back to concrete. Initially, I was 100% in the category that I was going to contract that work out. And as I performed more and more work, and as more and more people offered me advice and built my confidence, I started to believe that I could do that work myself with other people helping me, and we did. And is it a perfect result? No, but it's the concrete that you walk around on, and it's not going to break anytime soon, put it that way. So again, just know your limitations and know when you need help, and that kind of goes with use the right tool as well. This is just kind of briefly what I broke down via categories or like steps of the job. I've talked about planning and plotting a ton already. I don't know if I want to hit that anymore. Foundation, again, especially in Alaska, there's this natural occurrence called permafrost. You can Google that if you want, but you need to know what you're building on, especially if you're going to invest thousands of dollars into it. You need to have an idea as to what you're building on and what the land's doing underneath you. How much compaction you need, how much rock and equipment needs to come in, or gravel, I should say. If your layers need to be compacted layer by layer. It's just all these things need to be thought about before you just go out there and start driving nails into a piece of wood. I will say that regarding foundation, the foundation was a lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. I ended up doing that myself. I ended up doing everything by myself, we ended up doing everything by ourselves. We didn't contract anything out with the exception of the garage door, because the garage door was such an expensive part of the project relative to the entire cost of the project, that we just paid them, in my opinion, a little more for them to just do all the work. As in, like, I just walk out and push a button type of thing, and it works. And by that time, it was about time for me to catch a break, more or less. But anyway, the foundation work's pretty fun. You get to use equipment. So the steps I used was I marked out where we were going to build the building and made a constant line. Again, all this can be found on RR Buildings. He walks through all these steps. But then you have to excavate, so you have to clear the land and make sure the soil's good and get all the tree roots out and the trees that don't need to be there or in your way or are going to fall on your structure. And then you need to basically create compact land, or compacted earth, I should say. And for me, that was a bunch of gravel, much more gravel than I thought it was going to be, and a lot of time in a skid steer. And yeah, it's expensive. It's much cheaper than paying someone to do it. Much, much cheaper than paying someone to do it. And plus, you learn a new skill. But, up until the end, working with gravel is kind of a non-precision effort, if you will. You're just kind of moving rocks and compacting them. At the end result has to be close, or pretty darn good. But at the beginning, while you're familiarizing yourself with tools, like that's a good place to start until you build some confidence. Post setting and exterior walls. Like, I don't really know how many lessons learned there are here. Watch the videos, make sure you're square level and true and sticking to a square string. And of course, you have the bubbles telling you you're in the middle of the lines. Truss day is a very satisfying time. There are some pictures in the slideshow of what we used. So we ended up using I think it's a telescopic forklift. I called it the Boom Genie, but basically we use that to get the trusses up in the air and hang them on our Simpson strong ties. But another way to do this is you could have everything ready, your strong ties ready, and you could have whoever delivers the trusses not hang them for you, but they could position them with their crane for you, and then you could knock them in while they're in position. And I think the cost was like $200 an hour, or maybe it was a little less than that. At the time, I didn't really think it was worth it, but lessons learned. I might have done that because not only do you have the piece of equipment there for you, but you also have another set of hands operating the piece of equipment for you to free you up for some other task. So I might have considered paying someone to man the boom while we just worked on actually setting the trusses. Concrete work, I would get quotes and then do the research. If you can get to the timeline space where you're ready for concrete by yourself, you can probably do the concrete if you have enough labor help. Electrical work is, again, something I'll just talk about briefly, but again, I have no formal education on any of this, really. Just things I figured out during my time growing up and watching YouTube. But one thing I tell people about electrical work when they ask me is you have to be careful because electricity can kill you if you mess up. Just like setting a truss, fall on you or fall on the building the wrong way and destroy it. But you can save a lot of money doing your own electrical work if you invest the time to understand what will and won't kill you, or hurt you, I should say. Because once you understand how a circuit works, and once you understand the basics of what wires go where and what their purpose is, what their job is within the system, like you'll know when you're making a mistake. It actually, a lot of it really makes sense once you, again, make the time investment to understand what electrical, wires are doing. So again, just another place where if you have the time to complete the work and the tools and the resources, and you figure it out ahead of time, you can save a lot of money with that. Interior work, my least favorite part of this was actually hanging the drywall. I think a lot of people like doing that. I did not like doing it at all. There are definitely some things that I would do differently regarding the drywall work. I kind of took a shortcut and hung them vertically, which you're not really supposed to do. You're supposed to hang them horizontally, but again, I took a shortcut. I'm not living in this. It's my workshop, and once you put mud and tape over it and paint it, you can see, but you can't really see, if that makes any sense. But that's something that I wouldn't say I would contract it out, but I probably would have planned more time around that, or for that. And by the time I got to that step, I just wanted it done and usable, my workspace to be usable. So I just kind of took care of it, if you will. And then again, back to the use of space. There's, in the slideshow toward the end, I ended up framing out a corner of the building, and I have future plans for that workspace. It's not finished on the inside of the room yet, but have a goal, know what you're doing and where you're going and why you want to be there. And again, if you're starting from zero and you can build whatever you want, I would spend a lot of time in the design phase so you're very satisfied when it's done. One question that's commonly asked is, how are you going to heat this building? So a 24 by 64 building is, it's just over 1,500 square feet. 24 by 64 is 1,536 square feet. And the way it typically works here in Alaska is you don't have central AC like you do in most of the places in the continental U.S. It doesn't get hot enough per se to where you need to have central air conditioning. So what most people have is a boiler. So it's water that's being converted into steam, and the heat source is heating oil. And that circulates through your house one way or another to heat your home. And I didn't want to be under the constraints that I had to keep this building heated all the time if I didn't want to. So basically what I'm getting at is there's no plumbing in this structure. There's no pipes underground or in the concrete. There's nothing like that. So if you eliminate, plumbing and a boiler, now you're down to some sort of like heating above ground. So you can do electric heat. You can use some sort of fuel and do like some sort of burning heater. What I chose to do is I used a natural gas ceiling hung heater, and there's a ton of YouTube videos on this Mr. Heater unit. I went with I think it's the 80,000 BTU ceiling hung unit, and it works pretty good. Again, that's a lot of square feet. If I go out there and it's 30 degrees inside, negative 20 degrees outside, it'll be up to 45 in an hour, which is, when you're working, that's plenty warm enough when it's a negative 30 degrees outside. So again, I'll probably do a separate video on how that unit works, but these are all little things that need to be planned ahead for. Yeah.